Emma Slade Edmondson, welcome to our Conscious podcast. It's fantastic to have you on. You've been described as a thought leader. You do so much work in terms of sustainability, fashion, and educating, from what I see. And I just love you. I love the work that you do. I love the way that you think, and we seem to be very aligned. But I wanted to ask, I think the first question is, why do you often start talking about sustainable fashion by talking about your mum?
What a great question. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here and to chat to you. But yeah, what a wonderful first question. No one's ever asked me that before as a kind of starting point. Um, why do I talk about my mum as a starting point? Well, I guess it's because it's kind of the most human connection that I personally have to clothing. And I've noticed that people relate to this idea of thinking about their clothing in stories, in generations, in in love and loss. I did a TED talk a while back, which I did kind of center on losing my mum to cancer, and I talked about how one of the saddest things for me was having to go through her wardrobe and having to kind of really examine how connected I was to her through her clothes and through wearing those clothes and through the moments that we'd had together in those clothes. Um, and how our stories are connected to our clothes in such a kind of deep way, that help us kind of remember each other. And I think for me, it surprised me, to be honest, that that was one of the saddest moments in grief, especially early on. And I think, yeah, I found that it was a really clever way to connect people with how important our clothes are to us and how they're not really a moment in time. They're something that lasts um, on and on in our memory, in our minds. And yeah, it seemed to be a really great segue into thinking more deeply about why clothes are important to us and how they connect us to each other.
It's literally, we have that phrase, the fabric of our lives. And
Hmm.
actually, our clothes so much represent who we are, everything from status to what we feel like when we choose our outfit to, as you say, our memories of someone close to us. What they wear is really important in terms of how we associate with them.
Yeah, I think it's easy to feel detached nowadays from kind of even the humans that make our clothes, the other humans that make our clothes, because our clothes come from all over the world in many cases, and we don't see them being made. We are quite disconnected as a society to the actual process of making clothes and the artisanal processes that go into the making of clothes. And so I think for me, I always kind of want to connect people back to the humanity of clothing and the human stories. And when I first started out in this space, one of the things that I did is I ran a style consultancy, and it was called Back of the Wardrobe. It was very early. Nobody was talking about sustainable fashion at this time. I think it was like 2008 or something that I started. And really, it was about people connecting people with, why they choose the things that they choose to wear, why they have the things in their wardrobe that they have, and why there's those pieces that they wear again and again, and those pieces that just get left on the side, and thinking about how these pieces of clothing make them feel, what connections they have with those pieces of clothing that go beyond, whether they like the color or the style. Um, and I think we so often forget, that there's so much psychology in clothing and why we wear the things that we wear. And so, yeah, I think for me, I've always started from that place of the psychology of clothing and the way clothing makes us feel and the connection we have to it. And that for me is something that works in regards to connecting people to the wider issues around sustainability and fashion and so on.
And this is a journey that's taking you all over the place. But let's go back when you were little, when you were,
Hmm.
thinking about, okay, what am I going to do with my life? What was it that drew you? What did you think you were going to do?
To be honest, when I was really little, I thought I was going to be an author. Um,
And you
and
are, actually.
Well, yes, I mean, my first book
That's
is
part
coming
of
out
what you
next
do.
year.
Yeah.
So, but to be honest, somewhere along the way, I got lost in that, I'll admit, and I thought maybe that was never going to happen. But I think, to be honest, truly, since I was little, I've always been an innovator, and I've always been interested in things that connect people, things that help people, um, and things that are kind of purpose driven, I suppose. And so I would say all of the work that I've done has kind of had that focus. But I didn't know that I would be working in fashion, as it were, when I was little. But I always knew that I would do something creative. And I
And
suppose
that's,
that I would be a
forgive the
storyteller.
pun again, that's your common thread.
Yeah,
Innovation,
exactly.
storytelling, that's your common thread. So
Yeah,
and that could have gone anywhere. Where did the fashion
yeah,
side
it
of
could
things
have.
come in?
It's a funny one because I didn't imagine myself doing fashion when I was growing up necessarily. And I actually went to university to study psychology and sociology. And I remember vividly my mum asking me when I was doing all of my applications, "Are you sure you don't want to do like costume design or something?" Um,
I
and
am
of course
that
I was,
mother.
I mean,
I
of course
am
I
that
was
mother.
annoyed
I
at the
say it to my
time.
son.
I was annoyed at the time because I was like, Mum, I know what I'm doing. But of course, you know, I think we have to accept that mums do know best quite a lot of the time. Obviously, they can see things in you that you maybe can't see yourself. And, she just knew. She was like, you should just cut to the quick. And this is probably where you're going to end up in some form of this anyway. So, but it's quite funny to me to think that I was so outraged because I wanted to go and do something a bit more academic because everything I'd done up until then, I sung, I played the saxophone, I did art, theatre. Um, I even applied to Guildhall School of Music and Theatre, um, and yeah, I just decided, I need to go and do something academic. So I went and did psychology and sociology, which of course I used and use in all of my work. But it wasn't quite so obvious to me how I was going to use it initially. And so yeah, here we are.
And then did you start off being a stylist? Is that how it started?
So actually, my background is advertising and marketing. For my sins, I worked at most of the major advertising companies in London and elsewhere in the world, and I kind of I got I got sick of basically selling stuff to people that they probably didn't want, and in some cases need.
So you
Um,
say for your sins, but actually that was probably a critical part of your journey.
Yeah, it probably was. If we're making a movie, it would definitely feature, and also gave me a lot of the skill set that I now use in my work to create campaigns for organisations, bodies, and charities that are doing, good work to further the sustainability program. And I think, without that background and all of that learning and being able to take that away and then kind of apply it for these organizations that are, progressively moving towards a better future or working to do so. Yeah, I wouldn't be nearly as successful or useful probably. So
Yeah. So let's go and talk about the fashion industry and the problems with it in terms of sustainability. And there's so much to unpack here. And there's so much that I feel everyone's already aware of. But Tina, who produces this podcast, and I were just talking, and she was like, I didn't know that. I didn't know there was plastic in our fibers. I didn't know, and of course, coming from my background, I think, oh, well, everyone knows that, surely. So it's
mm,
really interesting because unless you've paid special attention, you might not know these things. So let's go right back to basics and talk about there are lots of problems in terms of sustainability and how we go forward on this planet and fashion and our desire to be, of the moment, which fashion really is.
Yeah. I think I think probably what you're getting at, and the best place to start is, yeah, the proliferation of choice that we now have, which didn't used to exist, but now does. And, people like Mary Quant created kind of a moment where people who didn't necessarily have access to different fashions previously were able to then get their hands on them for an accessible price. And it was an exciting time. And, it was a time when, as I say, people who didn't necessarily have that access got that access. And this was seen as something that was really quite wonderful at the time. But I think, to moving to where we are today, the issue really is overproduction and overconsumption. And, this scale in which we have these fast fashion brands and these high street brands producing now, they're producing so much clothing. I don't know where this stat originally comes from, but there's a stat that I heard that was like, we've got enough clothing to last us for kind of 7 or 8 generations. On the planet right now. So we really don't need to be producing anything more. What we've already got in circulation is enough, more than enough. But yeah, this issue of overconsumption and overproduction is meaning that we're producing so much waste. And this is obviously having a knock on effect on the planet. And of course, we are finding that the way in which companies are producing is harmful to the people that are producing the clothing, that are producing these pieces of clothing also. So yeah, it's really become a problem of epic proportion.
What's the driver with your psychology head on? Why? Why do we want more, more, more? Why do we want to consume? I mean, my friend was in the mall nearest to us on Saturday, and she said you couldn't move in there. It was horrific. I can't go. I
Mm,
really struggle to go to those places. I do sometimes, but I find myself overwhelmed by the amount of stuff, but also the amount of people. It's sometimes it's like a hobby to go and buy and
yeah,
consume.
it has
What's the
become a hobby,
driver
hasn't
for
it?
it? Yeah.
Well, most of the time it is to do with filling a hole, and this is it. And this is, to be honest, what I found with my styling business. It was way more about therapy in the end than it was about styling, because it was really about getting to the root of why someone felt that they needed to fill a void, why they didn't necessarily feel in touch with themselves and what they were feeling, and how they masked that with clothing. Because we use clothing as a crutch, we often use it to prop ourselves up. It's 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 much like a drug, I think, in some ways. Um, and people use it to make themselves feel better. And because clothing has become so cheap, it's become something that can be added into the arsenal as kind of a quick fix, something that makes people feel better in the immediate, um, to, yeah, boost mood, to kind of mask other issues, and to give a sense of newness to the self, by buying newness, by purchasing newness.
There's a dopamine hit as well, isn't there, when
Exactly.
you
Yeah.
make a
Yeah.
purchase?
Which is,
Um,
the dopamine element is not the bad thing, because, like I said, not only do we have so much clothing on the planet to last us for generations, but most of us have a lot of clothing already in our wardrobes. Um, and we now have exciting options for access to even other people's wardrobes. So it's not necessarily the dopamine hit that's the issue, it's the newness.
yeah, I still get that. I mean, I'll get that dopamine hit when I've got this ring, for example, I discovered in
Hmm.
a little secondhand shop in America, actually.
Gorgeous.
And it's, I don't know what's it made from. I don't know what you'd say it was made from.
Oh, I can't
It's,
see it well enough to.
it's like well, it's like a plastic acrylic, for those who are just
Oh yeah,
listening
it
and not watching
probably
the
is
YouTube.
acrylic.
Yeah, with a what looks like a little bit of a lace inside. I mean, it was 50 cents. So not even
Hmm.
not even $1. And I love it. I got a huge dopamine hit from finding it. I think there's something to do with
Hmm.
finding it. That's great.
Yeah.
And then there's all the feel good stuff of somebody loved it and treasured it, and now I am,
Yeah,
and will continue
exactly.
to do so. So there's those elements of it. So consumerism is rampant, as we know, them down to the fabrics of what we're buying. First of all, we've got the way that they're produced, the clothes.
Hmm.
I mean, secondly, then the vast amount in transportation, and thirdly, I mean, there's like I'm going to end up
There's no thirdly. There's
tenthly,
like we'll be going on.
tenthly.
Yeah, tenthly.
Let's
Um,
start with plastic fibers in our clothes. What's
yeah,
that about, and how do we avoid?
yeah. So it's really plastic is everywhere in clothing. So I think about 60% of clothing contains polyester, which of course is plastic made from oil. And I don't know how many people are aware of this. I recently did a campaign actually with an organization trying to raise awareness of this because I know that people know that there's polyester in clothing, but I actually think that people weren't aware of just how much clothing contains polyester. And actually, there's quite a lot of greenwashing going on. Um, a lot of brands are kind of like knowingly using terminology that kind of feels a lot more like natural fibers are being used. Um, and even wishy-washy language being used that just, you know, is giving the impression that the fibers are probably more natural than they are. So yeah,
Okay, and then what's
it's
the problem? Again, for those that don't know, okay, so there's polyester. It's got plastic in it. What's the problem? What's the problem with
so
that?
everything that's made from synthetics, whenever it was made, still exists today. It does not decompose, it does not disappear. Um, and, we already have the issue that only less than 1% of fabric is recycled anyway. And this is
Less
because it's
than
very
1%.
less than 1%. And this is because it's very difficult once you have a mixture of different fibers in the fabric mix to separate to recycle, which is what's needed for recycling. So essentially, you've already got this huge issue anyway that it's difficult to recycle fabrics. And then when you've got so much plastic being produced, you've got this element that just won't go away. So we're not just talking about issues in regards to health, because of course wearing plastic has got now we found has health issues associated with it, and there's been many different. Well, I don't know if you've heard the disturbing story of the airline who dressed all of their air hostesses in this kind of polyester fabric uniforms, and many of them got very, very sick because wearing this kind of material on your skin has been connected to things like cancer and other illnesses. And yeah, it's not just a problem at large, it is a problem that will become and has become individual. And I think that's probably something that people either are not so aware of or don't really want to think about. Um, so yeah,
It's complicated to think about.
mm,
And then there's
it
the
is.
industry itself and how clothes are produced and who is compromised in that production.
Sure. And boy, that's a layered um, topic to get into. I mean, I guess we can start with the idea that 80% of the people who make our clothes are women who are located in the global south. So if we start there, we already can see like we're outsourcing the making of our fashion on a huge scale. The reason that most fashion brands are doing that is because it's cheaper to produce in the south. And obviously connected to that, you have the obvious issues of whether people are being paid appropriately and whether they're also being safeguarded at work. Because wherever there are costs being cut, there are and wherever there are things being outsourced, so the people don't have the same level of responsibility for the way things are being produced, for the process, for the safeguarding, you'll find that, issues occur. And as we already know, I'm sure most people are aware that there have been many, many issues found within the fashion industry when it comes to ethics and when it comes to safeguarding of the people that produce our clothing.
How do we avoid it then? What do we do about it? When we're buying, what are our genuine options? Who's doing it right?
It's really difficult, and I think that's a question I'll never answer on a podcast or in press, because number one, things are always changing. And number two, unless you are embedded within these businesses, it's very difficult to tell, to know the detail on supply chain. And even many times the brands don't know themselves. So I think it's difficult to push the responsibility onto citizens, onto people who want to purchase fashion. But we should all be trying to be as aware as we can. We should be trying to learn as much as we can about the different elements of fashion and what the challenges are, and also how to spot greenwashing. So I think those are the places to start. I don't think that it's as easy as giving a list that is like, these are the brands you should shop from and these are the brands you shouldn't. Personally, myself, I use what I like to call my hierarchy of need, which is that, first of all, I will always shop my own wardrobe first. Secondly, if I really feel that I want something that feels new, I will go to rent something. And then thirdly, if I really want to add something to my wardrobe, I will shop secondhand. And then finally, if I really feel I can't get that thing either secondhand, rented, or from my own wardrobe, that's when I will start to consider a brand that is a conscious brand. And that's when I will start to look at perhaps my personal list of brands that I've, accumulated over time. But I will still always be going back to look at what I think that brand is doing now, because you can't just trust, for example, especially as, we live in a capitalist society, brands are trying to grow all the time. So, with growth comes change and potentially less responsibility. So, it's something that you have to kind of be actively involved in. There is no kind of quick fix, like I've got a list and the job is done.
It's really interesting that you say that. Actually, I'm thinking about my own habits, and I know when we went through the Marie Kondo phase of chuck everything out if you haven't used it for a year, I couldn't do that. I just couldn't
Yeah,
do it.
I really
And then I
hated
thought,
that.
then I had a real confidence crisis, thinking, well, I'm a hoarder. That's it. I'm going to die alone, surrounded by boxes of my old clothes. But I'm still so glad, because I tend to do less is more. So I tend to buy, if I'm buying new, which I do, I tend to go for something quality and have one of it. And then I still go back to things I bought 20 years ago and go, oh, I'm so glad I didn't throw that out. I'm in love with it again. I am. I'm so fickle. I'm like, oh, that thing, I don't even like it anymore.
But
But
that's
I'll put it
fashion, isn't
away.
it?
Yeah, I'll put it away, and then and I'll find it again and go, oh, I love this. Why have I not been wearing this for the last few years?
It's a
So
treat,
does it make me a hoarder? I'm not sure, but it means I've got loads of internal wardrobe shopping to do.
No, I am a maximalist, and to my husband's dismay, I keep everything. I love my clothes though, and I love, refinding them and re-wearing them and remixing them into different looks. I mean, that was the whole premise of um, my styling company. It was called Back of the Wardrobe because it was literally about old clothes, new ways of wearing them. That was the proposition. And, obviously I'm quite practiced at this, but we can all become practiced at this. And I think it's actually just such a joy to find things that you already have and remix them. And, there's a sense of accomplishment and enjoyment that comes from that, I think. And I think, keeping your things, if you genuinely intend to love them and wear them and use them, is not something to be ashamed of. And I hate that kind of
Yeah, that
expression,
shame culture
hoarder.
hasn't helped us. And when you mentioned your TEDx talk earlier, which we can all watch on YouTube, but what I loved about that was the skirt that you were wearing. Tell us where that came from.
Oh yeah. So the skirt that I was wearing was my nan's, and she wore it to my wedding, and she also wore it to her golden wedding anniversary. And I think, did she wear it to my mum's wedding as well? Probably. Um, but yeah, so it was incredibly meaningful to be wearing that piece on stage. I felt like she was with me, and in a way, my mum was with me. Um, yeah, it's
So
just,
much more than just a piece of fabric that somebody somewhere has sewn together. I mean, that means a huge amount.
exactly. Yeah.
All of those memories and stories wrapped up in. Is there hope? I mean, do we know that most of us are really, really busy and not thinking about this stuff on a day-to-day basis. Lots of people, that mall on Saturday that was rammed, are still shopping. Is there, and I understand why you're not willing to say these brands, those brands, but is there somewhere we can go? I know you work with Fashion Revolution and there are various bodies that you work with. Is there somewhere we can go for a quick fix to say, actually, uh, they're not very good, or these guys are doing really interesting stuff?
Do you mean for education, or do you mean more to? Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of resources and sources, and I should probably give you a list of those so that you can pop them in the show notes or whatever. But you mentioned Fashion Revolution. That is a really good resource for information. You can find reports on Fashion Revolution which will help you kind of dig into the detail on what brands and organizations are doing when it comes to transparency, which is a really good place to start, because if a brand is transparent or is not transparent, that's a really good clue as to how much or little greenwashing they might be attempting to do, and also how much effort and work they're putting into progressively looking at their own like systems, supply chains, etc. If they can't tell you the information, or they're unwilling to tell you the information, that's not a great base to start from. So Fashion Revolution is great for that. But I think, there's so many different kind of blogs or sources for these things nowadays. Off the top of my head, I probably can't list, but I can definitely give you something that you can pop in the show notes.
Yeah, we'll do that. With your stylist head on, I think
Mm-hmm.
most of us have a mini crisis of confidence at some point in front of the wardrobe. Some of us have a major one at some point in front of the wardrobe. And I think sometimes that ties into the need to buy a new outfit, because there it is in the catalogue, in the
Mm,
window of the shop, or, on the mannequin or whatever, on a model. And there's the outfit looking fantastic. Somebody's put it together for us. We can just go, oh, I love that look. That would fit me. So I can wear that. I'll buy it. There's the easy answer. Getting out of that mindset, as you said to me, I love to put together new looks with the clothes that I already have and put them together differently. How does somebody have the confidence to do that? What's your stylist tip for us from that perspective? Like buying secondhand, buying things that don't necessarily match, aren't designed to match.
mm. I think it's one of those things that is about a mindset change. And for me, not everybody's like this, but I think I like to be accomplished at things. And I think, you know, whether it's you like to be the person that can cook something really lovely when your friends come round, or whatever it is that you like being accomplished in, that you actually do spend quite a bit of time crafting and perfecting and becoming accomplished at. This is the same thing, practice is really the key, and giving yourself time to um, become practiced at this skill of styling yourself, at this skill of being slower with clothing and with fashion. And also, just like you'd lay your clothes out the day before an interview or even going to work for some people, I think that it's just about thinking ahead. I used to tell my clients to spend a night in with their clothes, with a glass of wine, get everything out, and just play, enjoy, really start to get involved with the business of styling, not the business of painting by numbers, where you go into a shop or you see a magazine and then it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to pair this with this and that's it, it's done, because that's uninvolved. What you want to do is get really involved with your clothes, get really involved with styling yourself. Because after all, that is, if you see somebody on the street and you think, wow, that person's stylish, or like they look cool, that's what they're doing. You know, they are not uninvolved with their style choices. They are giving it thought. They are curating. They are collecting, and they're doing the painting themselves. They're not looking for somebody else to do it. It's a creative process, and like any creative process, you can hone your skill and your talent.
And it's that mindset, isn't it, of a growth mindset, because it's so easy to think, yeah, they're just naturally stylish. They've just
Hmm.
got it, the mysterious it that I don't have.
Yeah.
But that's not the case, you're saying.
No, it's not. I've taught so many people how to style themselves. And yes, sometimes you probably feel like you might need a top up. Maybe it's the stylist you need a top up with rather than the clothes you need a top up with. That was kind of my philosophy. And I did have clients that would, years and years later, still contact me, even though I don't actually provide that service anymore. Um, Sometimes I'll have old clients asking me to just come and, give them a bit of a top up. And it's not that they can't do it themselves. They just kind of want a partner in that creativity to boost that skill for them again. Um, and I think, like anything in life, we all need that if we want to grow, and if we want to be able to enjoy whatever it is that we're doing to the maximum. And there's no shame in that. It's all fun. It's supposed to be fun, and somehow we've got to a place where it's kind of all a bit ugly. So yeah.
And the light-hearted, creative part of that, when you're buying secondhand, particularly, is fun, because you
Hmm.
never know what treasure you're going to find.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, it's kind of fun when someone asks you where you got something, to say that you found it, and, that you've paired it with whatever you've paired it with, and to know that your look is unique and you're highly unlikely to bump into somebody on the road that's wearing the same thing as you. I personally get a kick out of that. Like, that's something that I really enjoy.
And yet, fashion is so much seen as it's following a trend, it's everyone wearing the same thing. One season everybody will be wearing, these certain type of boots, for example. The next season they're out and something else is in, and you see everybody wearing the same thing. Um, and that's kind of the norm. That's what, fitting in looks like. And it's hard, I think, psychologically to disrupt that sometimes and stand up and say, yeah, but I want to be different.
I think fashion has always been a way of being different, though, of standing out, of putting your stamp on things, whether that be, and it can be a scale, whether that be in a really small way or in a really eccentric, grandiose way. Um, it is a way of showing people who you are. And so I think we need to kind of remember that and reconnect with that. That's why fashion weeks exist. That's why designers exist. They're artists who are giving us ways to kind of present ourselves to the world and to be different, not to be the same. And I think fast fashion and the high street has kind of skewed our vision of what fashion and style was supposed to be for in the first place.
Interesting. So do you think then, looking ahead, what are your visions for the future? Do you think fast fashion's had its day? Do you think we were already starting to shift away from it?
I think, unfortunately, whilst there's been a huge growth in the secondhand market, and there has been a huge rise in awareness around sustainability within fashion and the challenges we face with the industry in general, there is also a huge contingent who are supporting fast fashion brands, and that's for various reasons. There's reasons people have because they can't find their size in other more conscious brands. There's affordability reasons. There's reasons that people are addicted to that newness that we described previously. So I wouldn't say, sadly, that fast fashion has had its day as it currently stands. But I do think that there's immense kind of hope in the rise of, like I said, awareness around the challenges we face, but also the popularity of like remaking, mending, alteration, renting, and buying secondhand in modern ways. There's so many apps and there's so much interesting tech that we're seeing coming through that can help us with this kind of progressive way of working with fashion and style. So, I think those elements are really hopeful.
Talk to me about apps. Which ones do you love?
Well, I mean, obviously, I am a fan of the Depops, the Vinteds,
So, for those who
the
don't know, though, what's
Vestiaires.
Depop?
So Depop is an app where you can basically buy and sell clothing, secondhand clothing, your clothing. And what's cool about it is obviously you can begin to follow people and you will get a gist of whatever the style of their personal brand, like their personal style brand is, or whatever it is that their shop is. And you begin to kind of just know like what you're going to like and what you're not going to like and where to go. And you can obviously create alerts, much like many of the other apps that have popped up now. But Depop's, I think, quite popular with a younger cohort. And you'll find, a range of affordable items on there. Whereas obviously when you've got your vestiaires, it's a bit more expensive. You'll find more designer items there and so on. So yeah, there's definitely a range of apps to use if you're shopping secondhand. And then of course you've got renting apps now like Her, by Rotation, and you can rent either peer to peer or from organizations that are connecting you with the brands that you can rent from.
And it
So
used to
yeah,
be
there's
that, it used to be that you would rent maybe a ball gown for a special occasion. But now you seem to be able to rent most things. Is that right?
I think that maybe even renting a ball gown was kind of reserved for celebrities or people of note previously. I don't even think that was particularly common. Or perhaps you would if you had like the one do of your life to go to. Um, but I think now, I mean, I certainly have, I don't use renting for special occasions per se. I would just use it if I wanted to have something to wear that I probably wouldn't buy, but I'd either want to try or I know that I would wear maybe once or twice, but probably wouldn't wear continuously. that's kind of my criteria. So I think that really opens things up, and you find a all range of pieces and ensembles that really cater to the everyday, but perhaps something that you just wouldn't spend on for an everyday item. And I think all of us have wanted to do that, like wanted to wear something that's just a little bit out of our price range for perhaps a really lovely knit. Um, but nevertheless, it's nice to be able to rent that thing for a day and then send it back and feel like, you haven't bankrupted yourself. Um, yeah, so there's just lots of exciting ways now to lots of exciting tech. There's even tech that helps you organize your wardrobe, that
Oh, tell me
helps
about that.
you
I need that.
list. Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ones. There's Save Your Wardrobe, and there's some others. Like I said, I'll give you a little list that you can pop in the in the show notes. But it's cool to be able to just kind of list your stuff in your online wardrobe and like swipe across and see it all. It's a bit like being Alicia Silverstone and Clueless. You can just kind of put your looks together in your app, and then you kind of know what you're doing. You know what you have. If, like me, you travel and you might have some things in storage, you know what's in storage and what's not. It's just a really cool way of kind of organizing yourself. And I
Yeah,
think
you
that feeds
cannot
into what
hold all of the things in your head at once, and you're always forgetting something that you've got that
you
actually would be
can't.
perfect.
Exactly. And we don't all have Carrie's wardrobe. So, it's useful to be able to kind of say, right, okay, well, I know this is there because I've got this virtual app and I can do it all on there. And I think that really feeds into what I was saying when I was talking about slowing down and treating this as kind of a growth moment and something where you're going to like hone your skill. You kind of need to invest in the tools to do that. And I think this kind of thing really helps you see it in that way, because it's something to work on.
Yeah, yeah. And that helps you maximize what you already have, which I love.
Exactly.
So, are those the major ways that we can make a difference? I mean, obviously, educating ourselves about what we're buying, if we're buying, um, looking secondhand, and playing with style a bit more,
Yeah.
maximizing what we've got in our own wardrobe. Yeah, carry on. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that we didn't mention was policy, which is not really citizen led necessarily. But I think when if the more you become aware and the more you become keyed into what's going on, in a broader sense, when it comes to the fashion industry, if you are interested in learning more, you can kind of find ways where there will be things that you can support when there are pushes for policy change. When you do see these kind of asks, you can get involved, and you'll already feel a bit better equipped if you've kind of been learning on the side as to how you can support and whether or not you want to sign said petition or join whatever organizing is being done around light touch activism, if that's, if you're interested in that and so on.
And I found it really interesting how you mentioned earlier innovation. I mean, innovation is key to this, not just in terms of tech, which we've covered, but also in terms of fabric design. I see that happening quite often. I mean, I was watching the Stella Instagram actually just recently, and they are playing very much innovating new fabrics. Obviously, they have that ethical concern anyway. They replaced, it's all vegan. So they, new fabrics to replace fur, new fabrics to replace others. How far can innovation get us, and is there much innovation actually occurring in the industry as a whole?
I mean, there's loads of innovation happening. There's so much going on in biotech, and there's so many materials being made from, things like pineapple, apple, onion, mushroom. There's so many
What
different.
fabrics being made from those things?
Yeah.
Crazy.
And it's really exciting to see this kind of innovation happening, but we also have to be conscious that, particularly when you're talking about vegan materials, a lot of what's termed as vegan material is still made from plastic. You can assume a lot of the time that there's a high chance that a vegan material is made from plastic at the moment. So whilst there is all this innovation happening, and we hope to see many other solutions in the future being taken up in a widespread fashion, at the moment that's not the case. So yeah.
Yeah. And any last pieces of advice for us wannabe fashionistas who also want to be conscious?
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest piece of advice I can give is to remember that the enjoyment of style is really personal, and it's really up to you. And no amount of buying new things can give you the same joy that you will get from honing your own skill when it comes to styling yourself. And I would argue even, the skill of shopping secondhand. So that's personal for me. Like, that's how I've kind of really, really found my way into it. And everything I've learned and everything I've done has somehow kind of come off of those tenets. So yeah.
If you wanted to say, I mean, after listening to this, I feel quite inspired, and I think actually I could do with renovating my style a little bit more. Where do I start though? Do I buy a book? How do you do it?
Well, I haven't written it yet, so you can't buy it. But
That's your next project.
yeah. Well, actually, it's funny because I pitched that book a long time ago, but I think at the time people didn't realize, and as is often the case, I was too early.
She's ahead of her
But
time.
well, I think, a good place to start is what I was describing to you earlier, which I used to say to my clients all the time, which is you should start with a night in with your clothes. You really should start with a night in with your clothes, and really set out to enjoy this evening in with your clothes. Whatever it is that you enjoy, whether it be a glass of wine, a cup of cocoa, get yourself ready and get your things out, really get everything out of the wardrobe and start
And
looking at what you've got.
how do you know then? Okay, because I could put something on, and Tina will testify to this, producer Tina, because she's been my best friend for so many years, and she'll go, no. How do you know what looks good if you don't know, so to speak?
When you put something on, do you first think about what somebody else will think, or do you take a really long look yourself and think about what you like and whether you like it?
Very often, actually, with my clothes choice, it's about what it feels like.
There we go. See, this is a key part. So I was going to go on to say, one of the things you do when you have a night in with your clothes is you think about the things that you wear all the time, and you put those to one side. And then you identify the things that you don't wear very often. And you need to really think about why you reach for the things that you reach for always, that have become the staple, and think about why those other things get left in the back of the wardrobe, so to speak. And this is a really good starting point for exploring what the things are that are important to you, and what it is that you like and you don't like. And you've already identified comfort's really key for you.
The fabric
So
needs to be soft. If it's itchy, it's never going to go on. Even if it's remotely, if I've got a slightest memory of it being itchy, I now know because I'm old, that I won't wear it again.
yeah. And so you need to be thinking about things that have silhouette, but that are the fabrics that you like to wear. Those two things are key for you. Anyway, this is becoming a styling session.
But then that really helps us when we're looking at secondhand and when we're looking at our own wardrobe.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of this stuff, like I said, if you spend time with yourself and with your clothes, you can figure this stuff out yourself. Um, and yeah, things become way less daunting when you're out looking for those pieces to add to your wardrobe, or when you're having to style yourself for something that you think is important, because you kind of get much more confident in your own knowledge. You won't be ringing Tina because you'll be like, I know what I'm doing.
And then she'll say, I wish you'd called me. Bless her, she's not able to say anything at the moment because it's just you and I on record. Thank you so much, Emma. I mean, literally, I could keep going for hours picking your brains, and and I think we have that in common. There's so much fun to be had in finding secondhand treasures, particularly,
Yeah.
and revisiting what we've already got. And hopefully, so much of this is about mindset, which is why we called the podcast Conscious.
Yeah.
Just being aware of what we're doing, what our habits are when it comes to clothes and fashion. So thank you so much for lending us your expertise. And we can find you on Instagram.
You
And
can.
Fashion Revolution is another good place to start if we want to explore this further. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. There's so many places that I'll give you a tip off for, where you can educate and where you can learn. So yeah, I'll provide you with some more
Fantastic.
references.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.